First off, thank you guys all for coming. Welcome to High Tide Aquatics for another cocktail and coral talk event. Thanks for registering. Thanks for donating and keeping this awesome event going. And thanks to my sponsor, Barrier Reefers. This is going to be a little bit different setting here. Usually we have a speaker and the projector and all that. Today we're doing a Q&A session. And my guests today are Richard Ross and Matt Wandell. A little bit about Matt. He's been keeping reef tanks since the late 90s. He's worked in a lot of aspects of the industry, including at the California Academy of Science with Mr. Richard Ross. And now he's currently the Husbandry Operations Project Manager at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So we're pleased to have Matt here. Richard Ross, he's the co-host of the Reef Beat podcast. He's also worked in every aspect of the hobby and industry, where he worked along the side with Matt at the California Academy of Science. He managed several systems there, including running the 212,000 gallon reef tank. He spawns Acropora at home, which is ridiculous. And to boost his ego a little bit more, he was the 2014 recipient of the Mazda Award for Aquarist of the Year. So we're pleased to have Rich here.
Thank you.
Very proud of you. Very proud of you.
So yeah, let's get into a little bit. So first off, we're a little bit familiar, some people are, with your system that you have at home. So we're going to get into a little bit of the tanks you guys keep at your house. So you could just explain volume, what's in it, how long it's been up and running, stuff like that. And we'll start with Matt.
Yeah, at home I have an Innovative Marine Lagoon 24-25, the little like 10 gallon sump on it, protein skimmer. I kind of do the like, I guess I would call it from like the 80s, like the Berlin method, live rock, bare bottom, big protein skimmer, a lot of light, a lot of flow. I'm using natural seawater that I get from work, and then most of the calcium and alkalinity demand is with Alpha Reef, the tropic maroon stuff, and that's the gist of it.
Don't you have some sort of elaborate dosing system for your food on there?
Yeah, there's like a refrigerated food dosing system that's using like reef nutrition foods that I get mostly from you.
And what's your dosing system called?
I don't think it really has a name.
I thought you called it the Wandell method.
I mean, you could call it the Wandell auto feeder, but
there you go.
The WAF.
Yeah. Rich?
Can you guys hear everyone?
Okay, you guys
great.
all here?
My system's been up for 21 years, and it was up for 5 years before that in the old house. And it is currently, there's a 150 gallon display tank, mixed reef, with basically SPS on top and NPS on the bottom. And there's a 50 gallon sump that's connected to a 180 gallon sump that's under the house. And then in the lab, which is a spare room, there's another 300 gallons of tanks. And it's all one big system now.
And how many gallons total?
Probably 450, 500, something like that.
And you run natural seawater as well?
I do run natural seawater. I get it from Sea Pure, from Bob Mayer, who's awesome. And so every 2 or 3 months he comes and gives me, he doesn't give it to me, I give him money. Yeah. Or massages. What am I talking about? No one wants to know that now, later. And I get like 500 to 700 gallons of water delivered. And I started doing a constant automatic water change on the system, which I feel like helps me avoid all manner of lazy reefer syndrome.
And how many gallons do you do a day? Or liters?
I think it's 30 liters. 30? I'd have to check. I think it's 30 liters a day, which is 500 gallons.
1,800 gallons.
About 8 or 9 gallons.
It's like 8 or 9 gallons, yeah.
Yeah, a day, something like that. That sounds right.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about nutrients. PO4 and NO3. I know you used to run pretty high, Rich used to run pretty high nutrients. By the way, I didn't mention Rich's Skeptical Reef Keeping Series articles. I meant to mention it in his bio. He put those out in 2014, 2015.
Somewhere around there.
And those articles really changed my perspective on reefing as a whole. Made me throw out a lot of the stuff you read on the internet and just let tanks be tanks. And nutrients for me, after reading that, I kind of stopped chasing those numbers. So let's get into a little bit about maybe what you kind of run your systems at, what you think is too high of nutrients, and what is the importance of those nutrients. And yeah, let's have your take on it.
Who, me?
Yeah, let's go with you first.
I think that natural saltwater levels are a good thing to shoot for because that's what the corals come from. But at the same time, now that we've been keeping these things for long enough, we also have some idea what of at least the macro elements, what matters and what doesn't matter in terms of what the levels are. So as it turned out, in 2014, when I stopped paying attention to my tanks for whatever reason, and the nitrate and the phosphate went up to like 1.6 ppm was the phosphate, and the nitrate was easily 80 or 90 ppm. I'm putting units because you yell at me when I don't say unit. And I saw almost no difference at all in the system. So I was like, why am I spending all this time and effort and money trying to bring these down when I don't see a difference? So I just kind of stopped. And what I noticed was, the same thing I noticed when I was keeping it low. There's some corals that did well in the tank and some corals that didn't. And since there's 600 corals for us to choose from, I don't feel that bad if I can't keep a particular coral in the tank. I couldn't do it before either. So I fear I am not answering your question and I'm just babbling.
You're babbling a little bit, but you're answering.
I think mostly people are concerned. So people were very concerned with nitrate in like 2000 because the biological, the filter socks and the trickle filters and the wet dry filters were supposed to be nitrate factories, and we had ways you could control nitrate. Basically, water changes were really, and sulfur denitrators. So people were doing that, and then around 2003. GFO, granular ferric oxide, became available. And so we could test phosphate before, but we had no way to control it, so no one ever really cared that much. And then once there was a way to bring it down, people went, oh, it's high, we got to fix it. And so I think that's really, that's why people cared about that, rather than at those elevated levels what actually happened in the tank. I think now, the idea that those nutrients feed algae is what's taken over kind of the zeitgeist of the hobby. And I think that's kind of based on bad readings of papers. It is true, yes, that when there is runoff from a farm area, that your nitrate and your phosphate goes up, and that can cause algal blooms. But there are other things happening at the same time, and that's what gets missed. When we had the red tide here a few years ago, or last year, the year before. Yeah, last year and the year before, actually. The year before was bad. The popular press was talking about it's the nitrate and the phosphate, but it's also really hot now this year. So and the idea of, yes, if you add more fertilizer to things, they grow faster. But the reverse of that, if you add less, do they grow slower, makes sense in your brain, but doesn't really work out so much when you're talking about problem algae. The algae are so good at living, and corals are so bad at living compared to algae, that if you reduce your nitrate and your phosphate all the way down to where it's affecting your algal growth, your corals are not going to do well either.
Right, because algae have had, hundreds of millions of years to adapt to that really low level. of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water.
Yeah.
So you can go as low as you want. Even on a wild reef, you're not going to get it low enough that it'll stop them from growing.
That's where herbivores come into play, right?
That's where herbivores come into play.
Yeah. So I'm a big advocate of herbivores for algae because it seems a lot easier to do that than to try to spend all the money on everything to control nitrate and phosphate. And if you look anecdotally, because that's all we have in this hobby, no one's done some meta study of what people are doing in their tanks. It's about 50% of the time that people who lower their nutrient levels report that they have some success in battling algae back, and about 50% of the time that they don't. So 50%'s not a good bet, I think, for your tank. And it's funny, because I spent all this time putting a talk about this together last year. I spent 2 years putting the talk together. And then I went and looked and found a Reef Central thread where Matt and I were talking to people. And it's like, oh, nothing has changed since 2012 in thinking about this.
Yeah, more than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, the paradigm was you got to lower your nutrients when algae problems pop up. And to me, it's always been so weird because you can look at tanks that have algae problems and the nitrate is undetectable, phosphate's undetectable, and it's like, well, that's not the solution, right? If you look at, you can do this on a wild reef too, where, you know, on a wild reef with low concentrations of both of those, and they cage it. So you put a cage over a section of reef so tangs and urchins and stuff can't get to that section of reef. And algae grows like nuts, like mad. So the nutrients are not stopping it from growing. They're always there, right? And it's the herbivores that are really taking it down. And then, of course, as soon as you take that cage away, herbivores come in and just demolish it all. And that's why when you see on a reef, when you go diving on a reef, there's always this thin, like kind of patina veneer of just a little bit of algae. It's just enough, right? The herbivores are just keeping it in check, just the right amount. So,
you had mentioned about the red tides with the phosphate and nitrate in the higher temps due to global warming. So put that into a closed system in a home tank. Would you suggest people that are running higher nutrients to run a lower temp in that tank? Or do you think that correlates to more problems running a higher temp around the 80s?
I don't think you should mess with temperature other than, unless you're doing like deep water fish or something. If you're doing all these corals and fish, I don't see any reason to go outside of like the boundaries of what's natural, like right around 78 to 80. Maybe there's some ideas that certain things might reproduce, like parasites or whatever, might reproduce faster or slower. Maybe there's a reason to fiddle with it like that. I don't know. I've never felt the need to or seen any really compelling reasons to do that. And it's funny, there's a long time ago, there's like a lot of debate about like what the ideal temperature is. And if you look at like papers, right? Papers will say, oh, if you look in like Papua New Guinea, the average temperature over the course of the year is, it varies from like 86 to 82. Therefore, we should be keeping our corals at like 84 degrees. And this is a classic example of like misinterpreting data, right? Because what are people looking at? They're looking at sea surface temperatures. Anybody who's ever been diving on a reef knows that as soon as you jump in the water and get about 5 feet down, the temperature drops a lot. Sea surface temperature is not really that relevant, right? It's what's the temperature at 30, 40 feet down. And so, and that's where your maximum diversity of corals is going to be, right? It's not in the top 10 feet, not in the top 20 feet. It's a little bit deeper down. And it seems like, I don't have a bunch of data on that because there's not a lot of people that put data loggers down at that depth, it seems, year round. But it seems like 78 to 80 is what works for a lot of people. Anecdotally, we know that it works. We know that people are spawning corals in that neighborhood, right? So, yeah.
The GBR, the Great Barrier Reef cycle that I use gets down to 74 in the winter and 85 in the summer. And Papua New Guinea is the same kind of thing. And I don't know if that's sea surface or if it's better than that now. But to answer your question directly, if I have seen, some bacterial thing going nutty, sometimes I'll drop the temperature because it makes me feel like maybe they'll metabolize a little bit slower. I don't know. The other side of that is with spawning corals, and this was with the Papua New Guinea corals or with the GBR corals, if I get them up above 82, they're not happy. and RTN seems to happen more. Now these are corals that are gravid and are getting ready to spawn, and they've been pulled from the wild, although this year I will not be getting gravids. It will all be spawn from what I have now. So I don't get it. I don't let it go above 81 because bad things just happen, and I've seen that enough times that I don't want bad things to happen.
I don't know if you remember, there was an interesting debate too about just regarding temperature, like what's better, stability?
Right.
And people would describe, temperature stability as stagnant, which I always thought was kind of funny. It's kind of weird. You could also describe it as stable, right? Is it better to keep a stable temperature or to actually allow your temperature to do kind of what it might do in the wild and go from like say 74 to 85 over the course of the year? And the argument is the corals are more resilient that way. But just because something's more resilient doesn't necessarily mean it's the best conditions for it. In the same way that, you can beat a dog and it'll be more resilient to that abuse, but it doesn't mean it's the best environment for it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't let it get down to 74. It gets down to 76, 77. Actually, I don't even watch. I'm going to watch this time and see what they go down to. Did we answer your question?
I think so.
And then some.
Yeah, and then some. So let's get into a little bit about when you guys used to work together at the academy. Bouncing ideas off each other, learn from each other, friendly rivalries with achieving the same results, running different methodologies and systems. Is there any sort of that going on over there?
I don't think we had a rivalry so much.
No.
Not intentionally.
Not necessarily rivalry, but just friendly competitions and maybe, like I said, to achieve the same results, but running different methodologies.
Rich would always have corals grow faster than I would. He's better at coral than I am.
Yeah, and my tanks were always filthy cesspools, and Matt's tanks were always super clean.
I would always give him grief about his reservoir sump area being like a little bit nutty, random jars in there or whatever.
Yeah.
Mine would be like, I'm more OCD about the back of house stuff, but
Well,
He always
you're
grew
a
coral
sock
faster.
runner, or you're a sock runner. You're
Sometimes,
not a sock
yeah.
runner.
But you're a mesh sock runner.
I'm a very coarse sock runner,
So he's not a filter sock runner. He doesn't run felt socks.
like a 200 or 300 micron,
Yeah, that's not.
just to
That's
catch
fine.
big
Big
stuff,
particles.
less snails getting into your sump and into your pumps that way. Yeah. And stops some air bubbles, things like that. But yeah, I'm definitely more pro take your sock out of your system at this point, like a coarse mesh, like a foam. Yeah.
We got to go on a bunch of expeditions together, and they were really fun. We got to work on really cool projects together. We were always kind of one brain, was the joke we used to make with each other. And it even turned out that when we disagreed, once we sat down and talked about it, we didn't really disagree. It was just stylistic difference. So
Yeah.
I thought that was great. I like working with Matt.
We
a
would
lot.
often have like the same ideas and then not talk about, and then once we talked about it, I'd be like, yes, like randomly.
That's what
Matt,
I've been
how
thinking.
would you do this?
Yeah.
Have you thought? Oh, that's
And
perfect.
our
Thank you.
Our brains were doing the same thing. Yeah. Happen all the time.
Really fun.
All right. We'll get into some questions that people were able to submit beforehand.
Submit.
The first question, I don't know who sent this in, but he had, my GSP is green star polyps is out of control and is overtaking my less aggressive corals. What would you do in that situation?
Don't put GSP in your tank.
First off, yes.
I learned that a long time ago, and then a few years ago I put it in my tank.
Or
So
just
then
have a
you
standalone
regretted it
only
again?
GSP tank.
So dumb. You can't be lazy like me and have a standalone because it stops being standalone eventually.
We had this problem at Steinhart. I took care of a 4,000 gallon Caribbean tank there,
Oh.
and we put fire coral in.
And
I thought-
erythropodium.
Okay, so the erythropodium is this weird encrusting gorgonian that very much grows like green star polyps, except it's ugly, it's brown, and it grows right up gorgonians, it grows over everything. The only solution for that was literally just breaking the entire tank down, pulling the fish, pulling everything out, and bleaching it, and getting rid of it, and never allowing any rocks that had it to go back in.
But it's natural.
Yeah, natural reefs. But then I also put fire coral in, and the idea was I intentionally wanted to have this fire coral bommy that would, over 5-10 years grow into this nice big colony of it. Well, it only took like a year or two before it was like the size of like, and it started growing, it was on this sort of vertical pillar of rock, and it started growing down that which I didn't expect, and then started growing laterally and onto other things. And at this point, I was moved onto a different system. I didn't take care of the Caribbean tank. I was moving on to the Twilight Zone exhibit. And I kind of was able to selfishly just go like, well, good luck with that. And other people had to deal with it because I was busy setting up the Twilight Zone tanks, and Rich had the idea of, maybe you could explain it, but basically just like covering it, because it was a lot, and they wanted to just completely kill all of it and not have the problem pop up. And it was what, like pieces of epoxy? Z-spar, like making pancakes and then
you
just
smother
covering it.
Is that what you did with the Bryopsis at the Academy?
Yeah, we had a 2-foot section of Bryopsis that wouldn't go away.
Making these big pizza things of epoxy, and it looks terrible at first. And you can take a rock and kind of put it in there and make it look a little bit more natural, but as soon as it gets covered with coralline and all that, it starts to look normal again. So, yeah.
I had some GSP pop up in that tank right there, and I tried the epoxy deal and super glue. It'd keep popping through the epoxy. So I actually took that whole rock out with acros and monis on it and everything, and Schmitty, my camera guy, actually filmed me take a blowtorch and torched the GSP with a blowtorch. It was sizzling and crackling, then I dipped it in a bucket of salt water, put it back in. GSP, gone. 6 months later, it's back.
Yeah.
Oh,
just a little patch.
Yeah.
You can even burn it,
Yeah.
I've done that with Aptasia before. You got to be careful with your eye protection, of course.
I had goggles and a mask.
Don't do it with Palithoa ever.
No,
bad idea, terrible
not.
idea. But yeah, certain corals probably okay to do.
I tried to nuke it from
someone
space.
we don't like.
Yes, let's offer murder advice.
I tried to go Rich's route and nuke it from space.
Nuke it from space.
Yeah.
You can smother it. You can scrape it. You can put caulk on it. You
Caulk
can
paste, yeah.
caulk paste. You can hypersalinity it, which is if it's flat and low, or it's on top of a rock. You just pour salt on it.
Like dry salt.
Just dry salt, and then you get this hypersaline area, and nothing likes to live in that. So that's nice.
And is that better to do with just like some instant ocean salt, or like a specific type,
Instant-
like potassium chloride or something like that?
I've only done that with Instant Ocean, with an artificial salt mix. Although I started playing with potassium chloride today, so we'll see.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know. Potassium chloride, I don't think it's going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not as hypersaline, in the same way or at all.
I don't know.
It's hyper potassium chloride.
Yeah, I don't know.
So there's all kinds of ways.
Get it when it's small.
Just use
Get it when
all
it's
the
small.
different ways, and it's not. You're gonna have to do more than one thing.
It's not going to be a one-time ever. Yeah. It's got to be a management technique, unless you just remove it all, take the whole tank apart, take the rock out that it's on.
Yeah, you can hit it with acid. You can hit it with lots of stuff, but it's pretty resilient.
Like algae.
Yeah.
It's even more resilient than algae because it goes inside of that pretty whatever blue. Is it blue? What?
Purplish.
And then it goes, I'm protected.
Or find something that eats it, which probably going to eat other stuff too. Good luck with that.
Yeah, maybe a monk seal.
Something's got to eat it though, right? Something eats everything.
Did you see it spawning? No, it was Briarium
I hope not.
in the Philippines.
No, it was Cespitularia we saw mostly spawning, I think.
This one I know is from Thomas. Where's he at? There he is. So Thomas asked, do anemones, Mahanos, Aptasia, all the way to bubble tip anemones shed nematosis into the water column to fight other inverts? Like some reefers have noticed, like variants like the Colorado sunburst can't be kept in contact or even in the same tank, even when physically isolated in cages, as other variants.
Absolutely. No question about it.
And how do they do that, and how do they sense that?
I mean, I don't know like the changes that are happening, but they're definitely shedding them into the water somehow. The cells are coming off. We see the same thing with jellies. We used to have a coworker at Steinhart that took care of the Cassiopeia, the upside down jelly tank. She couldn't even put her hands in the water anymore because she developed a sensitivity to them. So she's not reaching in and disturbing them, just putting her hands in the water. She'd be getting stung from them, from the nematocysts. And that's with completely undisturbed, very healthy Cassiopeia just sitting there on the bottom. Nothing's bothering them, nothing's stirring them up. I would imagine that anemones are perfectly capable of doing the same thing. even in happy conditions, right? So, yeah.
And how do they sense that there's other species that are similar to theirs in the water to actually release those?
Oh, I have no idea. Or maybe they're just doing it all the time, just as a natural thing that they do.
Most things that do allelopathy, I guess nematocyst release could be a form of that, or at least it's similar enough. They do it under duress, but they also kind of do it all the time because they want real estate. Mm-hmm. It's all about real estate, and it's a constant war.
But no other coral types are affected from that? It's just...
Well, I had, sometimes I have Mahano booms. Mm-hmm. And what that means is in the lab tanks, sometimes I just don't care. And I have other things to do. And it's fine, but the Mahanos go like nuts, like disgusting amounts of, they're on everything. And I hit them with hypersalinity. I wiped out like a ton of them. And within a week, everything looked better. Super anecdote, N of one. But I had the same thought as the question. I went, hey, wow, maybe pest anemones aren't just direct sting. Maybe they're jerks all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No idea what the mechanism could be, but it definitely seems anecdotally like a real thing.
Thomas, did you want to say anything?
Yes. Do you think there's any way to remove them out of the water column besides standard water changes?
Probably just like heavy mechanical filtration. So
small.
So yeah,
20 micron.
We see that actually. That can happen. This happens at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where when we get jelly blooms in the bay, and there's constantly we're sucking in water from the bay, and sometimes jellies will get stuck to the screen, the intake screens that are out in the ocean, and that brings in nematocysts with them. It's a little bit more obvious how that's happening. They're actually being physically, broken up and stuff, and it's just mechanical filtration, sand filters, things like that. And if there's anything particularly sensitive, we'll put where the makeup water's coming in, we'll put a sediment filter on it. Like a 5 micron or so.
And that skimmer's not skimming them out.
I don't know. Good question.
Maybe a little bit.
And I certainly, when I tried to keep BTAs with Gigantea or with what's the other one? Magnifica, it was just they would not survive.
Like, why would it be mechanical filtration and not like carbon or a chemical absorption?
It's not a chemical, right? It's not
actual
dissolved in the water.
nematocyst.
It's cells that are getting sucked, that are getting trapped, right?
So that would mean the protein skimmer shouldn't get them either until they're already half broken down.
Say that again. Sorry.
Protein
so
skimmer.
The protein skimmer wouldn't get them either until they're mostly broken down already.
Yeah, right. And at that point, I don't know enough about the skimmer mechanics if it could pull out entire cells. It can't hurt, right? But I wouldn't rely on it as your method for. I would go with, if you have two tanks that you want to keep different anemones in, whatever is moving the water from one to the other, a mechanical filter. And you probably want to get different size sediment filters and toy around with. Because if you get a 1 micron, you're going to be changing it every day or something, right? It's not going to be fun. But maybe a 10 micron will work, or a 20 or whatever, yeah. And then do the largest size you can that still stops them. So, carbon couldn't hurt either, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
The other way around that is when I was trying to filter ick on filefish?
Yes, the big.
So
yes,
we had I got a big canister filter, a nuclear canister, new NuClR, not nuclear.
I think it's Red Sea, right?
Red Sea makes them now, I think. Yeah. And that's a serious canister. Pain in the butt, actually. And a 25 micron cartridge, but huge. And then I'd run a big pump on that and let it go for 2 weeks and let it foul. So as it fouls, it filters out finer and finer things. So the idea with that was it would filter out the different stages of ick, which I think are 18 to 20 microns. So after a week, it should be filtering them out. So it's the same kind of thing with nematocyst. Instead of having to change it every day, you could just go big on a 28 gallon.
Yeah,
and
if a sediment filter is better, you can get one of those jumbo size ones too.
But is it known that the allelopathy is nematocyst versus like a hormonal based chemical?
I've never heard of anemones. I think it would just be directly stinging.
Okay.
You know?
But like if they're in the same tank and baskets far apart, that's not direct streaming, other than like in the open water column.
Right, if they're in the same tank, that's going to be hard to do. Although you could put it in the tank. What are those things called? The marine land. It's
The
not going to
polishing
get.
filter?
It's not. Yeah, the polishing filter. It's not going to get all of it right, but it might reduce it at somewhat. You know, you're mitigating it.
I mean, as much as I'd like to see someone experiment with that, I also kind of think like there's a million things you can put in your tank. You don't need to have an enemies we know that are going to kill each other or that seem to be killing each other.
Right.
Just do something else. There's so much.
Right.
All right, when trying to prevent tissue necrosis and stress on corals, is it valuable to run at a lower temperature on average, 76 versus 81? I think we kind of just mentioned this, but it's on a different subject matter, so we still don't know. Tissue necrosis. Temp has anything.
It's all throwing knuckle bones.
Yeah.
Tissue necrosis at this point,
Yeah, we're talking rapid tissue necrosis at that point.
or slow.
With slow, it seems like it's caused by. I mean, I don't know. That's usually like acrorating flatworms, right? Or some parasite. You can try dipping it. Rapid stuff, I would just try to clip the healthy stuff as soon as possible and move it far away. But temperature manipulation. Yeah. Sanjay, I think, has a good philosophy on this, which is you've got this tank full of corals, right? Like dozens of different corals, and this one coral is having a problem.
Everybody else is fine.
Why are you changing your entire tank around? He's totally comfortable with, like, if that coral's gonna die, that coral's gonna die.
Yeah.
Tough, right? It's not every coral is meant for his tank, and that's okay.
You pull it.
Right? Don't change everything in the whole tank and then risk compromising the rest of the corals in there. Yeah.
I had a crazy idea about STN or RTN, which is if it's bacterial or if it's some kind of holobiont thing, can you shock everything? By jamming your pH up to 9, and will that shock the bacteria or whatever the pathogen is? Maybe. I don't, I'm certainly not going to experiment with that except by accident.
And what are the odds you're shocking it in a good way?
Right. And what else is going to die?
Right.
But the if big water changes, my kind of thought is something's not right. Something's causing this. This is if you've got a big run of it. If you've got 50 corals in your tank and you have one coral running, pull it, isolate it, dip it, and move on. If everything is running, which happens to Sanjay every 3 or 4 years, I want to make the environment different somehow. So I think maybe a big water change would be able to do it, or change the alk level.
Do 100% water change. Sure,
Yeah.
if everything in the tank
Get
is just
everything.
running,
Yeah.
I mean, why not just do 100% water change, right?
But temperature, that's just a knucklebone thing. That's something I can control.
Yeah.
So it feels like I'm doing. So do it because it makes you feel better, but know that it probably isn't helping.
I think Dana Riddle just went through a...
What I saw that his tank crashed. I didn't
Tank
follow
crashed.
up on it. His 120, it's a total loss.
Oh, yeah.
Either he doesn't know the cause as of that day, but Dana Riddle's 120-gallon reef tank crashed. What would you consider too high a pH, and why is that too high?
I mean, I don't think a reef goes much higher than 8.4, 8.5. I don't see any reason to go higher than that.
Reefs also run almost zero nitrates and phosphates as well, right?
That's a good point.
But
Well, never zero, of course, right? There's always some. Yeah. The pH, I don't see, you start to get in the neighborhood of like causing precipitation to happen, which is going to happen on your heaters and your pumps and all that. It depends on what your alkalinity is, depends on what your calcium is and all that, right? But what's the benefit to it?
yeah,
I feel like the nitrogen and the phosphorus thing, like, hey, it would be great if I could just magically wave a wand and keep the nitrogen and the phosphorus exactly what it is on a wild reef and duplicate that. It seems like it takes a lot more effort and work and filters and money, essentially, to do that. Whereas to keep the pH, you have to do work to get pH to go up past like 8.4.
we have a lot of experience with pH and running at different levels of pH. So we kind of know once you start hitting 8.5, 8.6, you're risking bad things. Just from us million reefer monkeys have done it enough, which is how.
on that threshold.
You're right on the
Bad
threshold.
things happening.
And so I don't like to be right on the threshold. That's why we like 78, 79. It's right in the middle. If your heaters go out, you've got a bunch of time. If your heater sticks on, you got a bunch of time. Same with salinity, 34.5, 34.
Yeah.
You've got space. You got headroom and
for
basement room.
Right.
You're running your pH pegged.
I know that my tank can get up to 82 and even 83 without problems, but that doesn't mean I'm going to run it at 83. And then if something goes bad, it's right on the it's right on the line already. And I know I could probably get down to like 72, 74 and everything would be okay. I wouldn't want to keep it that low. So right in the middle. Same thing with pH. Is there some benefit to going to 8.5, 8.6? Do corals grow faster? Maybe they do. Is it worth it? It's certainly not necessary, right? It might be nice if you're trying to jam out, grow coral. You're a coral farm or something like that. I can't say it's a bad thing, right? If you're right on that threshold of right before where calcium and alkalinity precipitate out as calcium carbonate, maybe it's great. I don't feel the need to do it. I'm keeping my tank around. I'm trying to hit 8.4 all day long. And man, I noticed the difference between that and like 8.2. Alkalinity demand went way up in the tank. So it definitely has a benefit, right? But it's like, where does that? If you go up to 9.0, everything's going to die in your tank, right? So there is a threshold that you can go too high.
Depends on how long it stays there.
Yeah.
Not that I did that twice in December.
Can Euphyllia polyp bailout be effectively prevented? I've seen this tends to occur as the polyp tissue recedes up from the smooth corallite skeleton into the part that contains the septa. Follow-up, how can we reduce this recession in the first place?
That to me seems like a symptom of some holistically the coral is not happy for other reasons. I mean, I don't know, with Euphyllia to me it seems like that, I'll call it the sock going up the ankle, that flesh going down the branch is sort of a sign of healthiness, right? It should be quite far down, and then you'll actually start to see babies popping out of that tissue down lower. And if that's not happening, if that tissue is up all the way up just where the polyp is and not growing down the sides, something's going on that's not great for the coral, whether that's not enough light, not enough flow, or too much of those things. I would say look at that as a holistic thing, and that the bailout is it's just a symptom.
There's acros polyp bailout as well.
Okay, I didn't know that. I've never seen that happen, but sure.
People used to get Poecilopora or Poecilopora damacornis, which puts out ready to settle larvae, like just constantly. That's what it does. That's its gig in the ocean. It's a pioneer species, right? And so people would say, when we didn't really know so much about spawning, people would say that was polyp bailout. It's like it wasn't. It was spawning.
That it was a stress thing.
Yeah, it was like, no, it's just spawning.
Right.
So I don't, everything can lose its polyp. I don't know if it loses it the same way, if acros lose it the same way, large polyp stonies do or NPS do. A few years ago, I had what felt like a pathogen in my tank that raced through, and my NPS and LPS the polyps were just floating around everywhere. That was awful. But I don't think, I don't know what to do about that. I think what Matt was saying is right on.
I had Colastria bailout at home, a little one, and that was when I first moved a fairly large colony into a new tank. Colastria is candy cane coral, right? It was the lime green one, and I just found one day a little baby. I don't know if it was a baby or a bailout, but it was like on the far side of the tank. It didn't make any sense to me. And I think it was a bailout because there was this colony that was growing in a certain way. I moved it into a new tank. Some of those are now shaded and not getting enough flow, and those polyps are unhappy. And maybe a last resort kind of thing is, well, I'll just leave my skeleton, go somewhere else. Maybe I can regrow. It didn't do well, but typically if it's doing well and growing, I don't know. I don't usually see that. It's usually a response to stress, right?
Yeah.
With like Euphyllia, and I've seen it with Colastria, and then elegance corals used to do that all the time too. We would see that.
And it's an art and a science, this thing we do. And I think that's right in the middle of we don't really know what's going on. But I'm with Matt. If the sock up the ankle is looking bad, there's something going on. whether that be your tank, tanks sometimes just don't like a particular coral. They just hate them. So get a captively grown frag and keeps trying until maybe something changes in the microbiome that lets it survive.
Okay, I think I got a few questions here from Alex. Where should we leverage ocean parameters for water testing and maintenance? And where do you think a closed system will benefit from deviations to these parameters?
You're looking at me.
What was the question?
I think he's asking, like, if you were to take ocean parameters and look at our tanks, like, what's good to not follow what the ocean is, right?
What's good to change things up and deviate those?
It seems like the hobby in general, the obvious one is that we change alkalinity.
Yeah.
I mean, we almost all don't run our tanks where really the ocean is.
5, right?
DKH in the ocean, I think, is like 7. If you're milliequivalents per liter, Craig will be very happy if I say this. It would be like 2.5, 2.4 milliequivalents per liter. I forget what that is in DKH. And we typically go higher, right? And it works for us.
Again, as a hedge, right?
Yeah.
It's
right.
I like running between 8 and 9 because when something goes bad, I've got 2 or 3 days before it hits 7.
Yeah.
Oh,
and it seems like stuff grows a little faster that way.
Yeah.
I don't think it's particularly important to worry too much about, nitrogen and phosphorus. We probably run, without even trying, a lot of micronutrients way higher than the ocean is, right? Just through trace contaminants in sea salt in our artificial salt mix. There's random things like bromide. Nobody cares about bromide, but I can almost guarantee if you're using Instant Ocean in your tank for all your tanks, your bromide is way lower than the ocean. It's something like 70 parts per million in the ocean, which is actually pretty high. And usually Instant Ocean doesn't intentionally add it. I think it's like a contaminant in, I want to say potassium chloride. They keep it at like 10. So it's like 6 times lower than the ocean, but nothing cares. It doesn't matter to anything, right? Temperature though, pH, calcium, potassium, magnesium. I don't see any reasons to, why not just stick with what is on reefs, right? The weirdness of it to me about switching some of that stuff up is like, you got to be very careful if you're doing it. Like your tank is completely stable, change nothing else, and everything's happy. And then if you want to play around with, like, say, increasing magnesium, then do that. But if you're changing magnesium and you're also putting a new pump in and you change your protein skimmer and you're switching from AFR to Kalkwasser, there's so many things always changing in our tanks. How are you going to know that thing that you changed is the important thing?
And then how are you testing? And how good is your test?
But if you're changing all those things and it's all those variables happening at once, you have now all these different variables for when something goes wrong. You don't know what the hell what the cause of it was, right? So.
Also, what's your goal?
Yeah.
Right.
Why? Unless you are farming stuff and you need to make your money back now, do you really care if your corals at your home tank are growing 10% slower than they could? I don't think we do. And by the way, the papers that talk about phosphates slowing down calcification, higher phosphate, it's like less than 8%. I don't care if my corals go 8% slower. It doesn't matter. Same with the pH, right? We often say, don't chase pH, because chasing pH can be just a rabbit hole of frustration in saltwater. What you're doing with the medium, the CO2 absorbing medium.
CO2 scrubber. Yeah.
The way you're doing it with the recirculating, that's great, but you're also crazy OCD Matt, who's going to be, with respect, who is going to be on top of that, right? Yeah. I would never do that because I'll look away and then the media would just be a bounce up and down. So natural salt water is great. Things change as well. We're figuring that out over time. What matters? But I think before you jump into tweaking stuff in your tank, you got to ask yourself, why are you doing that? Because it might not be worth it.
So an interesting thing too, in terms of like seawater being a little different, that's always stuck in the back of my head is the Waikiki Aquarium, which if you've ever been to it, has a really nice reef tank. A bunch of nice reef tanks, and the water that they are primarily using for those tanks is actually coming through like a seawater well. It's trickling through lava rock because it's Hawaii, and it's picking up iron and manganese and sulfur in some form that I forget now what it is. But the iron and manganese are like sky high, like probably hundreds or thousands of times higher than it would be if you were to go out on the reef, because out on the reef, iron and manganese are scavenged really quickly by phytoplankton and algae, and then it's like vanishingly small, right? But when it trickles through this rock, it has all that in there. They're trickling this into the tanks, and the corals look great, right? And is it harming them? No, it's not. So there is definitely, there's some deviation to what you can do from nature and still be okay. It's sort of knowing what you can deviate with, right?
I mean, what does calcium run in the ocean, really?
That's like 400 to 420.
400
parts per million.
Parts per million.
Yeah.
We don't care if it's 380 to 480. I don't care what my doesn't matter. Most people shoot for a magnesium of 1300, right? In the ocean, it's like 1220.
Yeah.
1400's fine, 1500's fine. Less than 1150 seems a little weird, but those are all not the same as the ocean, and we don't blink. It's just because we're used to that. And also, they're the macro elements. And
just so the comments aren't taken the wrong way, too, that doesn't mean you should be chasing numbers, right? Like if the ocean is 400 to 420 and your calcium is 440 or 380, no reason to freak out about that. One, because it's probably not a big deal, even if that number is accurate. And two, your testing kits at home, especially for calcium and magnesium, are probably 10% off of the actual number at best if you're doing a really, really good job with them. They should always be taken with a grain of salt. You're not nailing the number. You can almost guarantee it. So if you get 380, well, that means you could actually have a calcium level of 410 and not know it, right? So don't freak out about it. It's that long-term trend. If it was 380, sure, boost it a little bit, but don't take it. Don't freak out about it. Same with magnesium. I think those are the two big ones that people test for that are like actually really hard to test for, is my understanding, with home hobby kits. Alkalinity is a little better, but I've noticed this at home. I'll have a little drop alkalinity test kit, and then also the little HANA checker, and then also the KH Carer, the automatic alkalinity testing thing. They're all different, right? And so what's the true number? Somewhere in there. Average them all out, right? Yeah.
And the problem with the micro elements that I'm seeing, that I'm worried about, is that we don't really have good plus or minus on ICP testing for each element. Sanjay and I are working on a write-up that hopefully will be done this week, where we attempt to look at that in a little bit of a way. But it's, the small version of it, each element is got a different plus minus. So you can't say like this one ICP company has got a plus or minus of 5%. It's each element's got its own plus or minus. So not only do you have to look at what that is and decide, is a 20%, is a 18% plus or minus on nickel anything you want to be messing with at all? And that's why answering this question is so hard.
Yeah, it's
like
minor traces,
yeah,
all that stuff.
And in the States, lithium is sky high in most people's aquariums, right? And in Europe and Australia, it's not. And it's really high, like high.
I think it's magnesium.
It's coming from magnesium?
That's totally throwing a dart at a wall, but I think it's from magnesium sources, and it's a contaminant in
sure.
magnesium.
But
I'm
no one
probably
cares.
totally wrong about that.
Then why isn't it higher in Australia?
Because they're getting a different source of magnesium for their salts, probably, is what I would imagine.
Or it's coming from our source water. It's, but the first ICP test I did, they called me and they were like, "Oh man, your lithium is so high," and I was like, "So what?" Because if it's been high, it's been high forever. Just because I found that this number is high, I'm not going to freak out and do anything to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're belaboring this question. I think me. It's me. It's not either of you.
It's an interesting topic, especially with all the ICP stuff nowadays.
Yeah, one thing I could say about running higher phosphorus and nitrogen is coloration of the corals. I notice a lot more colors and less growth rate, but I will sacrifice colors over growth.
The dogma of those two nutrients seems to have changed a lot in the last few years in reefs. In the aquarium hobby, it seems like people are much more okay with like, oh, you actually want a little bit of these in there detectable. Trying to do that whole, what was the German
low.
thing?
Zeovit.
Yes, thank you. The whole Zeovit tanks
You will
seems
get your
to
corals growing.
have died. I never was a big fan of that. You can't go on a wild reef and see those. I mean, it was beautiful. Those tanks were beautiful, but it was, to me, just unnatural looking in a bad way.
What is your favorite reef keeping book everybody should read?
I'm going to say the Reef Aquarium Volume 1 and 3. You can skip 2.
Yeah.
Skip 2.
2 is just a whole bunch of little things that are interesting. And Volume 3 is really kind of a look back at Volume 1. So that's what I think.
Yeah.
Don't judge me.
No.
Oh, go ahead, judge me.
I'm actually going to say the same thing. If I had to pick one, I like all of Scott Michael's fish books.
Yeah.
I'm more of a fish nerd than I think this guy is, although you're a big fish
Yeah.
nerd too.
Oh, I'm looking at like how to keep a reef tank. Is how I'm approaching the. Yeah.
Totally. I would go with the Reef Aquarium Volumes 1 through 3, but with the caveat that when were those written 20 years ago? Between like 25 to 20 years ago. And so much has changed since then. I don't think I was trying to scour the depths of my mind to think about a good book that's like a hard copy that's like that I could like in the last 10 years. I don't think one exists. So much of what we do now is on Discords and forums and Facebook and everything else. That you just sort of have to be able to parse good information from bad information. And podcasts, out there in the world. But that's a good it's a good foundation. I really like those books. We used to work with Charles Delbecq. Julian Sprung is obviously one of our heroes, one of my heroes.
Love
Genius.
Love Julian.
It's a good series.
I was talking to somebody about something like this a month or two ago, and it occurred to me that I'm reefing essentially the same way I did 20 years ago and 25 years ago. Like almost, it's kind of ridiculous about how the philosophy at the base is the same.
Yeah, all the fundamentals.
And that's all in the TRA one.
Right.
You just got a lot more tech going on your system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just because I'm lazy.
Like you're not going to find the best brand of LEDs in that book, right? But you're going to find out how light works and why it's important. You're going to find out about how protein skimming works and why it's important. I mean, the basics, right?
How the nitrogen cycle
works, how live rock works, all that good stuff is in there. Right? Yeah.
What is your approach to managing minor trace elements?
Water changes, and on my home tank I'm using All for Reef, which has a bunch of that stuff. I've done ICP testing kind of sporadically, and everything looks like it's where it should be. I'm also doing water changes with water that from the ocean that I know is, for the most part, it's not perfect, right? But it's close. It's close, yeah. I'm not intentionally adding anything other, I'm not doing anything other than calcium alkalinity and the All for Reef. That's it, though.
But the All for Reef has trace elements.
Yeah, it's got a laundry list of different things. In the past, I've dripped in, I've done like silica before, actually, and iodide. But other than those, because both of those tend to get depleted pretty quickly. And I've also done iron and manganese. Again, they kind of tend to get depleted. They can. Beyond those, not really done a lot of trace element stuff. So.
I do some Bionics Transition Elements Plus.
Yep.
Because it's cheap and easy. And I guess my feeling is I just want there to be some of the traces. I'm not at all really paying attention.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to chase anything in terms of those numbers where the ICP says that there's one one whatever. It's like, okay, that could be half of that or it could be 10 times that. Because I don't think when you get to those like 1 part per billion, it's very rough,
Yeah, I dosed the Captivate Aquaculture, the Isolate MT trace elements. I dosed those according to directions for 1 year, and then did an ICP, and almost everything was online. And it's cheap and easy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I just think there's just got to be some. You don't want them to bottom out, but
And you don't want to overdose.
and you don't want to
So less is more when it comes to
you don't want to chase them like crazy.
Yeah.
You think you go crazy. Crazy. Can I say crazy?
Unless you're on
4 more times?
Moonshiners method.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is. I always hear about that, but I have no idea what it is.
It's like the Triton method. It's just you dose your 50 bottles of whatever based on what the ICP
Oh, you have
says.
a bunch of little apothecary jars
Doing
with
like
droppers
Yeah.
and tinctures and like a good bartender.
Yeah, and
like a good
you
cocktail.
you put on your big cone hat and robe
Yes.
and go to Hogwarts.
Sounds very magical. Yes.
Wow, that makes me sound like more of a jackass than I really am.
You're bugging. You're pissing off all the Harry Potter fans.
Along those same lines, which ICP company do you guys use or trust?
Yeah, to me, that's kind of like asking, like, which casino do you trust the most? I don't think that there's any solid. I mean,
97% payback is good for you.
You're gonna get. I think you're getting. I don't know. There might be some ICP company out there. You know a lot more about the ICP stuff.
Yeah.
You wrote that great series of articles with Chris Maupin. But my understanding of it is that for the cost that they're charging, is that they're not doing it right. They're ballparking it in a sense. Is that
the new paper? Gives some data on that.
Okay.
For me, it's the same thing as your test kits. Use the same one. And the data I think we're going to show is that there are non-trivial differences with the same water sample to different companies. So it's the same thing. Just pick one and stay with it. If you like ICP.
I happen to use Triton. I have used it, but I've got a grand total of like 5 tests.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's other ones. I don't know enough about it.
The other thing to me is how quick do you get the results back? You know, the Oshimo Christoph, what's that guy's name? Oshiamo? He's in some European country, I forget. But Christoph is giving margins of error and things like that. But you know, I don't see much utility in waiting 3 weeks for a test result.
Especially if you got something going on bad in your tank
Right.
and you're trying to
Which-
figure it out right away.
Which I don't know if that's the right way to go anyway.
Sure.
But so Triton's in LA now. They have a instrument there, so at least you get it back quick.
Yeah, there is no good answer.
Do you guys use bottled bacteria? Why or why not?
No.
No,
Next
not?
question. No, for me personally, I'm putting in natural seawater into my tank every week, and I know it's got tons of bacteria in it. What's the point? Yeah, I don't know. I've never seen any good arguments where people have gone, oh, I'm adding this bacteria in a bottle, and it has miraculously changed the state of my tank, and now things work much better. I don't know. Maybe there's some utility in it.
How flourishing can that bottle of bacteria be sitting on a shelf?
I mean, if they're shipping out stuff and it has an expiration date and all that, I mean, maybe it could be, but yeah.
it's up to them to show me that it does something. And I haven't seen anything that compels me to think that much is happening. And a lot of them say, and then add it once a week forever. And it's like, if my system can't keep its own bacteria populations up, I don't know why I'm inoculating. And are those the right bacterias?
Right.
We just don't know the answers to that yet.
I think that's like a
Bacteriums.
whole big world. I mean, everything we've been talking about so far in the water has been chemistry, right? And we don't really talk a lot because we don't really have the tools to look at biology and organic stuff that's going on. I mean, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of different organic molecules in our water that are like virtually impossible to test for, as well as all the bacterial stuff that's going on. I know that company, what is it, Aquabiomics or whatever? Super fascinating to me because that is sort of a completely untouched realm in terms of like what we can measure and see in our tanks.
Need more in the bank, I think, to make those
Right.
Aquabiomics more.
Yes, to like get a trend of like what's going on. We started when we worked at Steinhart. We started looking at essentially the total what's called the dissolved organic carbon that's in the water, and there's like a trend on reefs that's right around 1 part per million, and we were looking at what our tanks were at, and good-looking reef tanks and bad-looking reef tanks, and it seemed like it didn't matter a whole lot. There were some that were very close to that 1, and some that were much lower, and some that were much higher. And it doesn't tell you anything about the nature of that total carbon, right? It could be, all that carbon could be good stuff, or it could all be bad stuff, or it could be any mix anywhere in between. But it did tell us interesting things about like, when you threw activated carbon on your tank, what did that DOC, we call it DOC, dissolved organic carbon, how did it respond and what did it do? When we changed skimmers, what did that DOC do? So it gave us sort of a rough measurement of the effectiveness of different types of activated carbon when they were exhausted and what different skimmers did, which I thought was pretty interesting, just to have some parameter to look at. Right?
Yeah. And you mentioned live rock, and I don't think people get the idea that it's got to be live rock from the ocean. It's got to be great. I just want funky funk from. Yeah. If I'm setting up a new tank, I want some rocks from 3 or 4 different tanks that are doing good.
Yeah, a sump somewhere.
Well, yeah. As a group, we got so scared of pathogens, unnecessarily so. I think. I mean, some common sense stuff makes a lot of sense, but unless you're going to do it, I mean, this used to drive me nuts with the quarantine. Unless you're quarantining everything all the way through,
one snail,
you're just it just seems like it's your house of cards is coming down.
Yeah,
but
well, it seems fortunately like there was like a trend. It seemed like where people were starting to set up tanks with like just absolutely dry rock and like just chopping off the tissue of coral frags, and that's like it. Right? They're not putting any sort of live rock, anything from the ocean except just coral tissue. And you'd see these, like perfectly white rocks with like little coral frags all over them. It seems like that trend has kind of died. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
It's going away. The people who are responsible in a large part for that trend have now said, oh, well, now we've learned that it's not that. And that you don't want to start with a sterile tank.
Right. Then you need the diversity of bacteria in there. Yeah. Okay.
And it's very hard to sit there and go, you told us to shut up when we told you that when you started pimping this.
Yeah. You need all the little copepods and ostracods and brittle stars and bristleworms and
then let it stabilize out. So you're making a stew. You're not making some other food.
You guys have a favorite invert?
Cephalopods.
Cephalopods is like more than one invert. What's your favorite?
I'm gonna have to go with the lesser Pacific striped octopus.
I don't know. I'll say the crowd pleasing answer would be mantis shrimp. But
which kind? There's so many mantis.
Peacocks.
Okay.
Peacock mantis shrimp are really cool.
You want
I wish
one?
I could say some random species that's rare or something, but they're all cool. But I don't know. There's so many cool inverts.
Cephalopods like to eat them.
I get jazzed up about a sponge growing under a rock. Right. So I mean, I don't know.
What is the one piece of equipment other than light, flow, and skimmer or water test that every reefer should have?
A tank. Heater.
You forgot a heater, you idiot.
I don't know. I'm going to be a jerk, like I usually am with a question like that. Is to say, what are you trying to do? So the equipment itself isn't important. The thing you're trying to get done is important, and then you can pick the equipment to do that. Is a skimmer important? I don't know. Cheap and easy.
I don't know. It's totally not a necessary thing, but I really love my alkalinity automatic tester.
Yeah,
I have the KH Carrier by Kamoer. I'm sure there's other ones. I'm not, representing just that brand or anything. They all probably work fine, but I love it. It actually gave me a very different feeling and understanding of the tank and
what sort of swings
and what's happening and what, I make a change in the tank and I go, oh, my alkalinity demand consumption just dropped 5% or whatever, because nobody's going to test their alkalinity every day. Especially not the days you're not there, right? I really like that. That has been a game changer for me.
I'll take Matt's answer. I was testing an automatic phosphate tester, which I think will be very interesting and then be useless. As we find out that it just doesn't make much of a difference where your phosphate is.
Right, yeah.
But it's really neat to go, I put in this much food and my phosphate went up that much. Oh, so it's the food. Yeah, duh, it's the food.
Do you guys individually have someone you can consult with when you're having an issue you can't solve in your own tank?
We did not plan that. Yeah.
Yeah, Matt.
I actually like going on his podcast Discord, the Reef Beef Discord, throwing stuff on there, going, hey, anybody ever seen any crazy stuff like this before? And sometimes people will say terrible things, and I go, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, a lot of times, you ask a million monkeys a million questions, and they're going to give you, somebody out there has seen the exact same thing before and gone, yes, oh, cool, okay.
Yeah, the general advice I like to give is find someone who's got a tank that you want your tank to be like and see what they have to say about whatever.
A lot of people take advice from somebody like Randy Holmes Farley. How many people have seen Randy Holmes Farley's reef tank?
I've seen old photos of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I will trust Randy on chemistry,
For sure.
and he very rarely swerves out of that lane.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not really given husbandry advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's chemistry.
Which is great. I think that's awesome when people start going out of their lane in a sense, right? That things get funny. So speaking of Randy, I've read like every single thing he's posted online ever, every article. And every time I'm like, yes, this is all good, right? I actually was reading some of his old posts. I've never met Randy, and I never actually directly talked to Randy. He probably has no idea who I am. But I was reading an old post from him on Reef to Reef because I started doing this thing at home with a CO2 scrubber where I'm pulling CO2, carbon dioxide, with a recirculating skimmer. So it's constantly pulling CO2 out.
Into a media.
Out of a media, yeah. It's like a dry media. It's just the air is recirculating. And the idea is it raises the pH in your tank. In this room right now, the CO2 is probably much higher than it is outdoors. And in the wintertime, if you can't just open the windows up to lower the CO2, this helps pull the CO2 out of the air in the room, basically. Drawbacks of it are that for the media to work best, it needs to be humid and warm. And then it also just gets depleted really fast because you're basically scrubbing the air out of the room.
Yeah.
Your breath all day long. But if you recirculate it, it lasts much longer. His take on it was that people just shouldn't do that at all. And his objection was that as soon as your protein skimmer is doing that, you're no longer getting oxygen from the room, and so that your oxygen could drop. I'm like, pretty good point, but it depends a lot on the tank. And people undoubtedly run skimmerless tanks, and not everything in that tank is dying. So there's other ways of oxygen getting into the water besides a skimmer, and besides a skimmer that is necessarily taking room air. And so I brought an oxygen meter home from work and tested it. And it turned out that, I was at like 90%. And then if I turned off the recirculation, took in room air, I was like at 95% oxygen in the middle of the night when it was lower. So in other words, I disagree with Randy. I don't know how we got on this topic, but
I think that's a really interesting one because that your skimmer is supplying oxygen to your tank is dogma. It's everyone thinks you're getting that for gas exchange, and I think like if you have an overflow, you're getting way more gas exchange from the waterfall than you are from the skimmer.
Right.
So
Right.
I'd like to see more study on what you just said to see.
Right.
I think, but skimmer is so easy and does so many other things.
right.
Kind of.
The takeaway I took from it though was that the answer should be a little bit more nuanced than don't do it. It should be, if you do it, you should be keeping in mind that your oxygen will be not coming from your skimmer anymore.
Yeah.
And that it will be coming from the water surface that's rippling. And maybe that needs to be increased at night. And you don't want to have a canopy that it completely encloses it, that keeps it from breathing essentially.
Yeah. So don't trust Randy.
Or you have an air stone that comes in at night in your tank or whatever. And also just don't listen to anything Randy says. I've completely no, he's great.
All right, just a couple more. I got a question from the team at Quality Marine talking about sustainability in aquaculture. How far has it come? Where it's going? Why it's so important? Also, what is stronger or hardier? Aquacultured fish or wild caught fish?
I feel like Quality Marine guys are trying to plug Quality Marine. They know more about the state of aquaculture than we do.
Who at Quality Marine said that question?
Yeah, that's a commercial.
I'm not answering.
I'm not answering. I refuse it. No. I think aquacultured fish, I would say, as long as they're being culled appropriately and all that, and they're not inbreds or whatever, it seems like aquacultured fish are by far the best choice over a wild.
Do you think they're stronger or hardier than wild caught fish?
I think so. Yeah, I haven't seen any reason, unless it's like generation 8 and they're all inbred.
Yeah.
What about the fact that they haven't been exposed to wild caught fish? Haven't really been exposed to a lot of pathogens and sicknesses, like when a kid goes to preschool for the first time, all of a sudden he's sick.
Yeah.
You raised
know.
your kid wrong?
I don't know. I mean, they will be.
But sustainability in aquaculture has come a very long way. Let's take Bengais, for instance. We just stopped exporting Bengais, so you can only get captive bred ones. And luckily, we have captive bred ones.
Yeah, all the fish like, all the different angelfish now. I mean, it seems like every month there's a different species that I'm hearing about being bred that's like awesome. Some of those you just can't get good fish from the wild very easily. It's a gamble, right? It's like, why not go with an aquaculture fish that's going to be eating, it's going to recognize pellet and flake right off the bat as food. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer to me. I'm sure there's a solid argument otherwise, but...
So the worst outbreak I got of a disease came from captive bred fish, right? So the idea that you're going to get less pathogens, I think, is out the window, because that only if everything is done right, which you can't ever tell. Sustainability wise, I think aquaculture is really good, but I also think wild collection is really important, and I don't think it should go away. I think the problem is, the reason why we can make the argument that aquaculture should take over from wild collection is because wild collection is the Wild West. And it's really hard to know what's going on out there, and it's been abused. And in Micronesia, you can't get. There's no flame angels left because they were over collected. So it's things like that. If we were regulated and responsible about wild collection, I think wild collection is important, and it brings attention to wild reefs, and it brings care to wild reefs. And if we take everything out of that, and we rely only on aquaculture stuff, which you can't do forever anyway, right? But then you'll get more areas go back to subsistence fishing, which is not good for reefs, because no one just does it for subsistence. They try to make a living at it as well. So I think it's a complicated issue. But I love aquacultured animals. I think they're great. But I'd like to see the hobby be, the wild side be responsible and sustainable, because there's no reason it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Down with aquaculture.
Up with aquaculture!
Just want to check with people's smarts.
Somebody else say something else. Up with aquaculture. We love it.
Farming, and then also aquaculture has its own costs that people tend to not look at. Stateside aquaculture is really expensive. And the reason you see it happening in Florida is because they don't have to heat anything. And they do it outside in ponds, and that's what Bali aquaculture is doing, right? And that's what they're doing essentially in Australia for a lot of it too. It's if you do it right there, that's what they were doing in Palau. You got your water, that you're putting in. You don't have to worry about feeding the little things, because you're just collecting natural plankton with your flow-through system. So that's all great. When you move that into doing it land-based, away from the where the animals are from, it gets more expensive and harder. You got water problems, you got temperature problems, it's just expensive. Electricity is expensive. So, does it make more sense to? Now I'm going to just start repeating myself, so I'm going to stop myself.
Let the ocean do the aquaculturing. Yeah.
But that means we need to change, and the supermarket approach is probably not the right way to do it.
What do you mean by the supermarket approach?
Right now, you go into most fish stores, not this fish store. You go into most fish stores and you go browse for what you want. That means that along every step of the way on the chain of custody, each step needs to be fully stocked with animals, because anybody might want a bunch of them at any moment, which means more are being collected. More being collected means more are probably not making it through the collection, because you're trying to cut costs wherever you can. So you wind up with a suboptimal system. But that also makes it affordable. If I like the idea of collect to order. And that's not, there's somebody saying, I'm doing what Rich always wanted. It's like, you're not. What he's doing is he's finding a list from a exporter, and he's letting people know, and this is a fine thing to do too. And he's like, here's the list, what do you want? This is what Rich always said. It's like, no, because on that list, he's got 100, Navaricus angels, and they've got, 200 Caloplesiops. No. The thing I think would be great is, hey, I want to, like Brian used to do. Brian Green used Twilight Aquatics out of Hawaii.
So more direct.
You call Brian up and you go, I want 2 flame angels. He goes, all right, I'll get them for you next week if I can. And then you wait a couple weeks, and he calls you and he goes, I got you some.
Yep.
So, but that changes everything, and it's more expensive, and that's why aquaculture is good. That's another reason aquaculture is good. You could take all your aquacultured fish and hit them with a hammer for fun if you really wanted to, because they're not part of the ecosystem. I don't think you should do that, but we do that with all kinds of other animals, so the ethics gets a little murky there. So I would recommend new hobbyists use aquacultured stuff that are easy to keep and cut their teeth on that. So I think that's a great use for that. There's no reason why a new hobbyist should have, a wild collected gem tang. It's just, don't do that. Unless, they're really rich and they can afford them.
Then do it.
Then get 3.
This next one's a little detailed. It's from the god of marine-related baking and painting, Jason Langer. So with the advent of social media, online forums, and other outlets, the amount of information shared has increased greatly, but the quality of that information seems to have been diminished or diluted. Content providers seem to favor getting clicks over getting facts. Businesses are making claims over providing data. Recently, there seems to be a division among hobbyists over what is considered good information and what are reliable sources. Does an influencer have good information? Is a business a reliable source? Where would you guide hobbyists looking for good information from a reliable source?
Don't trust anyone with a podcast.
You could ask this question about so many topics now, too, because we live in a post-truth world. Vaccines, climate change, whatever.
Post-expert world as well, yeah.
And it would be great if there was some reefing institution that we could rely on.
Right.
I would say primary sources are always good as long as you're interpreting them. And by primary sources, I mean scientific articles, peer-reviewed stuff. As long as you're interpreting them correctly, right? And then I always like to trust people whose tanks I can see. Although I'll say I trust them to tell me things that work and not necessarily things that don't work. That's a little bit of that staying in the lane thing I've heard. Like, I'll give an example. If the person who I'm thinking of was listening to this, I'm sure they would know what I was talking about them. Basically, you can have a really nice looking reef tank, and let's say it's lit by metal halides and think that metal halides are great and they work, and you are correct. But if you were to then extrapolate to LEDs don't work because I'm not using them on my tank or I had problems with them or whatever, I don't think that that's necessarily a valid argument. I really like the method of like, I am doing this and this. These are the details of what I am doing, and this is the success I've had. Whenever I write an article about fish or whatever, or talk about stuff, it's exactly what I'm trying to nail. Is like, here's what I've done. This worked to this extent. Not saying it's the very best that can be done, but then you can go from there. It's not to say it's the only way that'll work, right? There's a million ways to skin a cat. It's the best thing about this hobby is everybody's doing different things. And then also I would say that just because somebody says they're successful, don't necessarily take that as success. So for example, Dendronephthia, carnation corals. People will say, oh, my carnation coral is doing great. Almost everyone that I've ever spoken to has their carnation coral die within about a year. Even though it looks great for 6 months, it's slowly starving to death. So nothing, as far as I can tell, that anybody has ever done is actually working. So how we define success. Another one I would say is like, an example is tangs, right? My tang that I've had for 2 years is doing great in my tank that's 100 gallons. My Flamingi tang, right? If you ever go diving on a reef and see a Flamingi tang, you will know, a full-grown one, you will know that the 200,000 gallon tank that we took care of, the Steinhart, was not big enough for a Flamingi tang. So when you go and you see experts online that say a Flamingi tang just needs a 500 gallon tank or a 1,200 gallon tank, they're wrong. Those fish live like 40 years. They get massive. You're not going to keep one in your tank for its entire lifespan, in your home tank. It's just not going to happen. So I would just be cautious about, how you define success and how they define success, and being critical about it.
Yeah.
What Matt said.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a reason I have a lot of display tanks set up here, because I think maybe they look good enough to take advice from me.
Yeah, your tanks are great.
Yeah, it's perfect. You want a tank like that, talk to him and he'll tell you what he does there.
If you don't want a tank like that, don't talk to me.
It's perfectly great. I feel bad for people getting into the hobby now, but it was also just as bad before, I think. And every hobby is designed to get the new person to buy everything. That's what the industries are. Kiting, oh my God, this kite, and it's all about equipment. And you buy the equipment, and then after 3 or 4 years, you go, oh, it's not the equipment. I suck at this, and now I'm better because I just learned. Why should I think I should be great? So all the hobbies are like that. I think we feel that this hobby is different because we're keeping living things. But at the same time, if we look at how, as a society, we ethically deal with living things, I mean, it's great to say these fish are great and we treat them as pets and we love them and fish are wonderful. And then you go to a market in Borneo and all of these fish are for sale to eat, right? Or you go to Florida and, it's very cool to take a picture of all the fish that you caught that they nailed to a board behind you. Right? So it's, I don't know how ethically we can say these fish are more important than the fish we just don't care about because we don't keep them as pets. So it gets into a weird place in my head, which is not answering the question at all.
As far as businesses, though, whether businesses are trustworthy, I mean, it's a valid question. It's like they're there to sell you stuff, right?
I mean, you can go on Amazon right now and click in bucket mousetrap, and there's 50 versions of a bucket mousetrap that all say that they're perfect and work. Or even worse, something to make a gutter guard, right? Gutter guard's a huge scam. It just, you got to clean it just like you got to clean your gutters. It just doesn't really help. So, can we blame any manufacturer in our hobby who's trying to get you to buy their product? I don't know. Yeah. I don't think so. I don't know why we would expect them to be in the small industry to be held to a higher standard to anything else.
But then there's also useful stuff like, BRS makes some videos that are...
Some are good.
Really good information. But it's hard to separate that out from necessarily stuff that isn't such good information that a business might be making you should buy this awesome coral that we just got. Well, it's actually from 68 degrees and it's not going to live in your tank and they're just selling it to get rid of it. Those little purple lace corals that people will say, oh, these are great.
The yellow anemones that are on the market now.
Oh, the green anemones, how curious.
How curious.
That are from like Japan or wherever they're from. And they're
Don't
from
buy them.
Cold water. Yeah, these are going to look great in your tank. No, they're not. So that's just wasting your money, right? How to parse all that? Good question. Find people you trust.
Bar club, local club is always a good place to go. Anyone you can talk to, I think, is good. The big places, the big forums, I think, are sweet money. The smaller groups seem to be more interesting.
Rich.
That's for you.
Thanks, baby.
That's your guys' payment.
All right, we're on the last one here,
7.
and this is from Joe Waiolo.
Yeah.
Shit.
When is the commercial glitter line generator going to be on market?
How did I know he was going to do a 10-year-old joke? Joe, I love you so much. Come up with a new joke. I was just out seeing Joe, when was that? September. I went out and saw his facility. Awesome. His facility is so cool. His tank, his rebooted tank is better than the last one.
What size is it?
20,000.
It's still the same 20,000 gallon tank, but he redid everything, right? Took it down. I think he got rid of Polyfellow was what he was getting rid of, so he bleached the entire
because he
tank.
was getting sick every time he got in the tank.
Yeah, right. So the new and improved tank is just amazing. I mean, I would say it's probably the nicest reef tank in the country, if not the world.
And I think he's arguably the best reef aquarist on the planet.
He's so good at it. Yeah, it's a really nice tank. But Joe has questions, right? Joe, like all of us, who's done this before? I mean, everybody. Yeah. Everybody has sort of stumbled around in the dark a little bit with this hobby, I feel like. Yeah.
The glitter line thing's an inside joke from a talk we did long ago.
He's got one more.
Oh my God.
Why don't you just give the critters what they need when talking about care for them?
I did a talk about larger Pacific striped octopuses, and Joe was at this talk, and I was talking about how I was doing everything I could for the babies, but they were hard. I couldn't figure it out. And that was what the talk was about. And the question from this person at the end of the talk was, why don't you just give the octopuses what they need? And I kind of went, I just froze. I don't know how to respond to that question.
It's the most like profound voice in your head ever. Why don't you just do what they need?
We don't know what they need. That's what the talk was about.
Oh my gosh.
That was
Why don't you just make them happy?
Yeah. Just
What's
give
your
them what they
problem?
need.
That was it for the pre-submitted questions. I don't know if anybody else here has any questions they want to ask. I know Mohan here did.
I was just curious if you could talk more about your career journey. How did you get into this type of work?
I'll go first. My family kept animals from when I was a little kid, big aquariums and stuff like that. And my first job was at a local fish store. And then I became a juggler. And then I became a stay-at-home father. And when that happened, I got back into aquarium keeping. And this guy was working at Steinhart, and they needed volunteers. So my kid was 5, and my wife said, you should talk to grown-ups. And I thought, yeah, okay, because I'm going crazy. So I started volunteering there, and that turned into a job, which turned into research, which turned into all that stuff.
The old typical juggler to reef aquarist.
Philosophy degree juggler story.
Mine was just always being into animals. Did marine biology in school, and then got into aquariums after that, actually, because I thought it sounded cool to be a marine biologist, without really knowing much about it, because Seinfeld. Then was a bartender after school. Was keeping reef aquariums. Was keeping doing private tanks, things like dentist offices and stuff like that. And then volunteer position opened up at the California Academy of Sciences. Knew they were building the world's biggest reef tank, closed system reef tank at the time. Went, I want to go work there. So volunteered, worked. Was an aquarist there for 10 years. Was an aquarist at Monterey Bay Aquarium for 2 years. Now I'm a project manager there. So I get to help develop sort of the bigger picture on some of those things, and that's where I'm at. And I wouldn't recommend it if you ever want to make money.
Yeah.
I do it completely for the love of it. It's got my brain working all the time on things that I just am super passionate about. I love doing it. But yeah, if you wanted to do aquariums for money, I think cleaning private tanks, which I'm always trying to get you to do, is a pretty lucrative way to do things. If you can find all the clients. But, it's not a money maker. Right?
Yeah, for me, I got into it when I was 13. Couldn't have dogs or cats at home, so I got into freshwater fish at an early age, and then 13. I remember always going to the store and picking out fish, and they go, "Oh, that's saltwater fish. Oh, that's saltwater fish." And I always wanted the saltwater fish, so at about 13, junior high, I set up my first saltwater tank and never looked back. So it's been over 30 years of just falling in love with every aspect of this hobby. And yeah, I'm driven by passion, not by money, obviously. It brings me a lot of joy taking care of these animals. I'm gonna cry.
Yeah.
They're very special, and they're fun to take care of.
And a non-stop challenge.
Absolutely. If this was easy, we wouldn't be doing it. Because everybody would be doing it.
Right.
And I like the constant challenge of it. Just always having something thrown your way that is sometimes you cannot understand it.
Right.
There's so much things involved in these things that we can't understand. You can read so much data and stuff, and we just can't understand certain things.
Hans from Alameda.
Probably throw it in the tank. Is there a good way to get rid of it once it's already in the tank?
You squeeze them, and then run your gums.
What?
You want to bite them off.
What did he say? Was it? What?
Pally.
In the tank.
Oh.
The easiest thing is the rock that they are on, take it out and bleach it. If you can't do that, I've been playing with, you can inject them with muriatic acid. You can inject them with, I'm hesitant to say it out loud, potassium chloride, which can mess you up. So I'm trying to find I found a potassium chloride that you can get that won't kill you, and seems to work. But I need a bunch of time to really show that it really works and is worth it.
What about caulk paste?
You can caulk paste them. You can aphasia them. You can smother them. I would say make it a project for 3 months and go in every 3 or 4 days and hit a few at a time.
And run a lot of carbon in here.
Yeah.
While you're doing that treatment.
If you want to borrow a laser, you should borrow a laser and see how long it takes you to fry, each one,
Just a couple at a time.
Yeah, you might have to hit it 5 times, but that might be easy given the amount of pallies you have.
And the epoxy pancake thing might be a good start too.
Yeah,
if there's
you
a lot
can
of it.
you can epoxy over them.
It's ugly for a while.
Combination too, caulk and epoxy pancake.
Oh yeah, put
Yeah.
something nasty under there
Yeah.
before you. Yeah.
Yeah. Pallies are really, really robust. They are.
We should say too, while you're choking to death, and polytoxin.
Yeah, don't help me.
Speaking of
Talk about pallies.
Everybody that's even thinking about messing with Palithoa in their tank should watch. Just Google Julian Sprung, Palithoa, Macna, wherever the heck he did the talk on it. And he gives, I want to say it's like a 10 or 15 minute blurb about his experience with Palithoa, and wasn't trying to kill them, wasn't trying to do anything to them, and got very, very ill from it. It is not a toxin to mess around with.
Nope.
At the Monterey Bay Aquarium, we've completely removed all of it from our tanks. We're never putting any species of Palithoa into our tanks ever again, intentionally, because of that, because of how dangerous they are. So be careful. If it is on a rock that's in your tank that you can remove it, I would just remove it and be rid of it. Wear gloves when you're doing it. It's scary stuff to me. I know, and then I'm sure people will go online and say, I've been cutting this stuff with razor blades since I was 10, and I walked 5 miles uphill both directions to school in the snow.
Yeah.
But there are risks to it,
I've got some pallies in one of the under the house tanks, and I'm just gonna pull them out into a bucket of bleach. It's just.
And it could be the folks that are chopping them up are doing with a species that isn't that toxic, and you've got something different, right, in your house, and now you're dealing with a much more toxic species, right?
It is the most deadly organic compound known to man.
Second.
What's first?
After
Tetrodotoxin.
no, it's what
Tetrodotoxin.
I could be totally wrong. I thought it was the one that was botulism. Botulism. But is it TT? It could be TTX.
It's TTX.
Yeah. Also, don't get bit by blue ring octopuses
Yeah,
in your house,
that's smart.
or eat puffer fish.
Yeah.
Other
Or
sage
put a
advice.
fork in the outlet.
Right. Other sage advice. Yeah. It's dangerous. It can be dangerous stuff. So.
Anybody else have any?
Mike stood up. I love it.
Bring in any more wild qualities in for your spawning projects?
Oh yeah. So in 2020, I raised the spawn was at the academy, but I raised the babies at home of Acropora hyacinthus. Sorry, Acropora hyacinthus. And I'm sorry. Let me go back. What we've been doing to start spawning is setting ourselves up to win by collecting or having collected for us corals that are already gravid with gametes. So 3 or 4 months before the projected spawn, get them collected then. If I'm collecting myself, I break a branch and look for eggs. And if there's no eggs, we leave that one alone. We go to the next one and we collect the ones with the eggs. When I'm doing it at home, because I'm not collecting them myself, I'm just asking the collector to collect them from at least 20 meters away. They're doing like 500 meters. It's crazy how helpful they've been. But, so, in 2020, one of those spawns, I raised those up. This year, they spawned. So I got F2s, which is a bigger deal than I thought it was. It's like, wow, okay. I don't have to get anything from the wild. And this year also, the Millipora I didn't lose them all. Bringing them in, spawning them, figuring all that out is really hard on the corals. This year I'm much better at it than I was last year or the years before. So I have 5 or 6 Millipora left, and I have all the hyacinthus that left. So there's kind of no reason for me to get gravids again this year.
I guess my question is, at what point, or is there a point would you be concerned about like inbreeding or
Yeah, I think we're really far from that point.
like
Because I'm
generations?
not breeding the babies back to, back to each other. Well, I guess I am, but I'm gonna the F2s I made from the hyacinthus. I'm gonna keep making F2s from those hyacinthus. So it's not like I'm taking babies of babies of babies of
I
babies,
see.
right?
You're
The
keeping-
the parents stay alive. Yeah,
Okay. So
Yeah.
Just spawning the parents. every
right,
year.
right. And then the other thing I'm doing this year is I'm getting a few strawberry shortcakes from because I don't know what they are. Because Joe had them. Joe at Unique Corals had them, and I'm getting them now instead of getting them in September. And I'm gonna run them up and see if I can get them to spawn. So my goal with the spawning is to make it easier. And boy, if you can just set up your tank and then set it up for spawning, and then 12 months later you get a spawn, perfect. That's all. We need to figure that out. We need more people spawning because hobbyists do things much faster than research people do. I'm not concerned with making sure I have replicates at home because I don't care. I want results. And I'm not publishing a paper because no one cares anyway. If anybody wants to know what I'm doing, I'll tell them what I'm doing. That's how we did it with all the fish we've done. It's not academic. It's practical. So that's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. And the more people that get involved, the faster we learn stuff. Chris, what's his name? Meckley? Meckley is doing acanthophilia, which are not acanthophilia anymore. They're fibromyalgia. No, that's a disease. They're whatever they are. And he's doing it basically through just smashing his head against a wall by getting a whole bunch of them and checking them every night for months.
Are you talking about donut corals?
Sure, donut girls. What's a donut girl?
That's like the acan.
It's a scully.
I thought it was okay. Okay,
I don't know. I don't
I thought
know.
they were still acanthophiliac.
Maybe they are.
You know,
I don't.
like a homophilians or?
Oh, it might be homophilia
I
now.
think they're-
Homophilia now. That's
They're
what it is.
billyphilia.
Yeah.
So, and he's getting some success, and it's great because he's bothered. And that's really kind of what it comes down to. Sanjay is getting into it now. So I've been working with Sanjay, and I'm hoping by the end of the week to have a schedule that I can share with anybody who's got an apex that's not going to be reliant on what's actually happening in the wild. This would be a completely artificial one. You set it up a year later, you should get a spawn. So that'll be really helpful. And that's only happening because Sanjay's involved, and I've come this far, and Jamie's come this far doing it at home. So this is a long answer to your question. Spawn your corals. When you frag your corals, look for eggs. At least you'll know if you've got that. Did that answer you?
Yeah.
Okay. I've had a Coke and a half, so I'm jacked.
Colonies.
Yeah,
I thought you were spawning the generations.
right.
At some point, that would be problematic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, like with cuddles, it's hard. Around generation 7, they start looking like they took thalidomide, but that's because they die. They only live a year, so you have to breed the next generation to itself. Yeah,
What he said.
That's right.
just like ghost pipefish.
We should do a
And-
ghost pipefish culture.
We should do it. We should cross a ghost pipefish with a barjabanti.
Yes. That'll be lovely.
Matt and I got to work on some crazy stuff. We bred ghost pipefish. We bred
Pygmy seahorses.
pygmy seahorses. Just insanity. The benthictinophores.
Benthictinophores.
Oh my God.
Tell us the story of the benthictinophores.
What'd you say? Sorry.
No.
Biggest thing you worked on.
I think the wildest animal that would be the benthictinophores that we worked with. Those were just crazy.
That was crazy.
I remember somebody pulled those up from a dive. They went deep. We were there in 2013. And somebody brought it up. It was like the size of like a little baby football, We didn't even know what it was. There were people who was in the room. It was like, there were like invertebrate people with PhDs in invertebrate taxonomy from the academy that were there. You know, one guy's like a nudibranch guy, one guy's like a coral guy. So they're not specifically ctenophore people, but they just know a lot about invertebrates in the ocean. And they're like, yeah, we don't know what the hell that thing is. And look up benthic ctenophore, look up Lyroteuthis, Lyrocteis specifically.
Can you use it in a sentence?
No. They're these crazy things that look like bunny ears that stick to things underwater, and they live deeper down, and they have these 2 long spider web-like tentacles that they catch food with. They're ctenophores, they're comb jellies, they're just their own thing. And most ctenophores are like, or the ones that you see that look like that movie The Abyss. They're mostly floating around in the water. They're the ones that have the, they have the refraction, or the diffraction, excuse me, it looks like a compact disc, the rainbow of colors. If you saw a video of one, you'd totally recognize it. Most of them, the vast majority of them, float around in the ocean, and they're pelagic. But there are a few that stick to the bottom, and they're called benthic ctenophores.
And they're weird.
Just bizarre. Nobody's ever kept them. Nobody's ever displayed them in an aquarium. We did. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about them. Just go look up videos of them. They're just weird.
The pygmy seahorses, I don't think I'll ever forget the first time the male let babies out.
Yes.
That was insane.
Had it already given birth once, and then we came by a second time because we knew when it was going to happen? Yes, that's what happened.
Yes, I was alone the first time.
You came in, and it was a surprise, and you found a bunch of babies, and we were like, holy cow. And then we found out that it was going to be 2 weeks later, and we showed up at like 6 in the morning. And so our idea was, we're going to be here at sunrise, because that's when they give birth, or not give birth, but they release all the little babies out of the male's pouch.
Right, so this is a seahorse that's like as big as my pinky nail, right? They're tiny. They live their whole lives on one kind of gorgonian. And not only one kind of gorgonian, we're pretty sure they just stay on the same gorgonian for their whole life.
They never leave. Once they find a gorgonian, that's their forever home.
In the early morning, the male gives birth, ejects out, and they go swim around for 100 days in the damn ocean, and then somehow they find their way back down 80, 100 feet to this one kind of coral.
They can probably sniff out the coral.
It's in the ocean's big.
Yeah.
And they're really small.
So we go in to see, because we know when the male's going to do the thing, and we go into the room, and he's got like this mega camera set up to get it all filmed. And I don't know why we did this, but we just went into the room and flipped the light on. And we know that, I don't know why we did that, because that triggered him to go, oh, it's sunrise.
It's time!
And so we looked at him and was like, oh my God, he's doing it right now. He's like already starting. And so that kind of messed up the timing of it. But we did end up getting,
we got the footage.
We did end up still getting one like really good
But that's the kind of thing, it seems so obvious afterwards, but you don't know until you know.
Right?
Yeah.
There's
And then
one
we
in that tank there.
raise them find out they come in 2 colors, right? And so Matt's genius was able to get both colors of the. Oh no, you got the pink stuff. You got the pink coral that you were able to source, and we had collected yellow seahorses on orange, I guess, on an orange gorgonian, and Matt like collected them, and then that day they were on the plane home. It was like awesome, exactly how you do. We did the same with ghost pipefish. We collect them, we're on the plane on the way home. By the way, ghost pipefish releasing babies, I don't know if I'm ever going to forget that either.
Yeah.
But the coolest thing about these little seahorses is we had the orange ones, we only had the pink gorgonians. They landed on the pink gorgonians, and they turned pink. They didn't stay orange.
Which was kind of an unknown thing.
Totally unknown.
Nobody had ever like confirmed that, because nobody had ever witnessed.
Well, are they 2 species or not?
Yeah, are they 2 species? Is it that orange parents only give birth to orange babies that find orange gorgonians, or is it that orange seahorses or purple seahorses can give birth to either one, and they just turn into the color of the gorgonian that they land on? And it turns out it's the latter. They can basically settle on a gorgonian and then somehow see the color of it, and change their body to match it. And so I've told this story to countless people, and every time I ask little kids in elementary schools any questions, they go, what happens if you give it a rainbow gorgonian? Will they turn into rainbows? Or what if you gave it what if you put it on a transparent gorgonian? Would it turn clear? Well, okay. And the answer is no. I mean, it only has like one of 2 or 3 choices basically. But yeah, super cool stuff.
But is that response then genetic or symbiotic?
I don't know if it's either.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know enough about how to phrase it. It's not genetic. It's turning on. It's an RNA thing, right? Somebody who's a molecular biologist explain it. It's basically turning on certain genes. It has the genes to become orange or pink, right? And then it's just turning those on somehow. Yeah.
But if you put it on a yellow, would it turn orange or pink or yellow?
You're talking about an adult?
They don't change.
Maybe even a fry. Maybe even a little baby,
It's-
but a color that you knew wasn't within the adult's capability.
Right. I don't know what it would do. Well,
It's got to be the right coral.
it's got to be.
Always orange or pink,
That's the
what
thing.
if you put it on purple.
It's got to
There's
be
no
the right.
purple
It's got to be
gorgonian.
the right gorgonian. So there
one
seems
species.
There seems to be there's a sort of algorithm, a bunch of algorithms that the Seahorse does to find the gorgonians. One is that it's trying to find light values. So it's basically able, if it's too bright, we found this out in the chrysal tanks that we were raising them in. If it was too bright in the room, they would try to swim deeper because they're trying to find these gorgonians that typically live around 80 to 90 feet. So if it's bright, they're on the wrong part of the reef. Lower the light levels, they would then be happier. And they only live on one genus of gorgonians. So I don't think these seahorses, with all the effort they make to find those, are going and just landing on whatever and then just dying. I think that they are chemically sniffing out. This is a hypothesis that they're sniffing out, and there's totally precedent for that. I mean, that's what clownfish do. They can swim across a football field right at a sea anemone that's their host anemone because they're smelling it in the water.
We've seen that happen.
Make a beeline to it, right? So there's something that gorgonian is releasing that they can smell and go right to it. So it basically couldn't go to a gorgonian, or it wouldn't want to settle on it. It makes a choice to settle on it, and we were seeing this when we presented the gorgonians. We actually presented, the first thing we did, I don't know if you remember this, was we presented them little fragments of gorgonians, and they were like kind of hitched onto them and kind of creeping around them, and then they would let go. They would release it. They're investigating it, and then we gave them larger chunks of gorgonians, and then they were happy with it. And the suspicion is they are basically, this is their forever home. Once they decide to land on that, that's where they're going to be forever. So the assumption is that they're going, this is not right. This is too small for me. I need a bigger area. So there's a little process there where they then decide, okay, I can stay here.
I gotta say the coolest thing ever that I experienced with Matt was in the first trip we took to the Philippines. We were on a night dive and we're swimming around and started seeing a lot of stuff in the water. Swimming around some more. There's a lot of stuff in the water. And it was me, Matt, and Bart. And we're swimming around. And at the same time, all of us go, ah! Ah! We all just started yelling because it was a coral spawn.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, that was like 2011. And, you know, we didn't know much about coral spawning then at all. And we never expected to see one. I never expected to see one. And that was the craziest experience ever. And we had like Ziploc bags and we're trying to collect the spawn.
It was a
and,
complete coincidence. It wasn't, because everybody's probably heard this story about like on the
full moon.
Yes, on the full moon in the third week of November or whatever, all the corals on the Great Barrier Reef all spawn at the same time. Well, it turns out that that's not always the case, and that some corals just spawn whenever the heck. And we were trying to time it to moon cycles and there was no rhyme or reason to when corals were spawning. And then we went back like the next night and different corals were spawning. I mean, it seemed like it was this constant orgy of spawning happening. And there were ones in the daytime, and ones at night, and coral spawning happens a lot more than I think it's not like this one grand event that everybody spawns at once.
It's totally happening in everyone's tanks. I pretty much guarantee it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that walk down memory lane. That was exciting for me. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm doing your job. I'm sorry.
You're good. I think,
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
thank you for coming.
Thank you guys all for coming on this wonderful Non-rainy night.